יהודים!
תשכבו, תשכבו. אמא! תשכבו! לא לפחד אבא, אני פה. אני חושבת שיפול עליי. לא ייפול עליך. יד חיים שלי, מה אין לנו זמן לרוץ.
Tensions on Israel's southern front escalated over the weekend. Palestinian Islamists launched dozens of rockets and mortar shells from the Gaza Strip toward the southern communities of the Jewish state. Rocket alert sirens sounded in numerous towns and cities, including Ashkelon and Sderot, forcing about 200,000 Israelis to rush into bomb shelters within the Home Front Command's instructed 15 to 30 seconds time frame, respective of the community's distance from the jihadist-controlled territory. Medical teams reportedly transferred a pregnant lady in her 7th month to hospital after she fell while running to a bomb shelter. Thankfully, it was confirmed that no harm was caused to the unborn child. Furthermore, several people were treated for shock. Meanwhile, the Iranian proxy in Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, claimed responsibility for the indiscriminate rocket fire. The Islamist group highlighted an incident yesterday morning in which 2 of its operatives attempted to plant an improvised explosive device next to the security barrier with Israel, drawing deadly fire from Israeli forces. Following the incident, the IDF refused to return their bodies, effectively implementing a new directive from Jerusalem. Unless the bodies of 3 IDF soldiers that remain in the custody of the Islamist organizations in Gaza are returned, Israel will henceforth refuse to return bodies of jihadist operatives. The measure infuriated the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In a published video that purported to show barrages of rockets fired in Israel's direction, the terrorist organization vowed to retaliate to what it described to be Zionist crimes against the Palestinian people. In a retaliatory response to the Palestinian aggression toward the Jewish state, the IDF launched a wide-scale bombardment against Islamic Jihad targets in both the Gaza Strip and Syria. According to the IDF spokesperson's unit, the multi-front attack inflicted a devastating blow to dozens of the Iranian-backed organization's militant installations. In Syria, an Islamic Jihad research and development compound located in the Adaliya region outside of Damascus was targeted. The Israeli military revealed that the compound was being used for the purpose of developing weapons and rocket fuel, among others, that are later smuggled into Gaza. Separately, Israeli fighter aircraft targeted numerous installations belonging to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad across the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. In addition to the destruction of militant installations, the Israeli Air Force targeted several of the jihadist terror cells that were preparing to launch rockets toward Israel. Direct hits were indeed confirmed. In light of the escalation, the IDF Home Front Command instructed Israel's southern communities to keep schools closed throughout the day. It also barred people from congregating in open areas and limited events of more than 300 people. It is important to note that the Palestinian rocket fire toward Israel is still ongoing at this moment, and Israeli retaliatory strikes against the Islamic Jihad were reported throughout the day. Since the start of the escalation, more than 35 projectiles were fired indiscriminately from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip toward Israel, and while no major injuries were reported, damage was caused to public areas, including a children's playground. Turning now to Israel's capital, where a terror attack was averted in Jerusalem's Old City on Saturday when an Arab Islamist attempted to perpetrate a stabbing attack near the Temple Mount.
היום סמוך לשעה 11, לוחמי מג"ב ושוטרים של הר הבית הבחינו במחבל שרץ עם סכין שלופה בידו מכיוון מעלה מוטגור לכיוון שער האריות לתוך שער השבטים. אחרי שקראו לו מספר פעמים לעצור והוא סירב, נאלצו לירות בו ולנטרל אותו.
By now, Pierre, you're in that playground that was hit by that rocket coming from Gaza a little bit earlier. What can you tell us?
Well, I'm going to show you, I'm going to try and reenact what happened here an hour and a half ago at noon 30. This is the impact of the rocket. The rocket exploded just here in the sand when children who were not at school because the schools were closed were playing in that playground. This is some sort of a Noah's Ark, and you can see the debris of the impact of the rocket with the nails, the crushed wood that has been blown away by the rocket. And now Igor Basilenko is going to follow me. You can see here shrapnels that just literally spread the area. Now children had only probably 10 to 12 seconds to run for cover. These are the leaves which were blown away by the impact of the rocket, and the children had just time to come to that shelter. Igor is following me, and you can see this is the shelter in which those children came to protect themselves, and luckily everybody went to the shelter. Nobody was wounded, and you can see here more impact on the cement, more impact of the shrapnel of this rocket. Sarah?
Absolutely terrifying scenes down there. It's Pierre Clochelet. Thank you so much for joining us.
Finally, some measure of calm has returned now to the communities in the south following an intense barrage of rocket fire and retaliatory airstrikes.
In less than 48 hours, Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists in Gaza have lobbed over 90 rockets and mortar shells at southern Israeli communities. The terror group also claims that this latest attack is a successful retaliation for the death of 3 members in Gaza and Syria. And while the IDF intercepted over 90% of the rockets aimed at populated areas, some broke through the Iron Dome's defenses, including one rocket that blasted into a playground and shrapnel that caused light damages. Thankfully, though, no injuries have been reported, and international officials, including from the EU, Germany, and UN, have condemned the Palestinian terror group for its violence. Now, in the meantime, the IDF has also launched a series of retaliatory airstrikes against Islamic Jihad positions in the Strip and in Syria, and while a shaky ceasefire is now in effect, Israeli army chiefs say they believe more violence could be on the way, especially with just 7 days left before elections. IDF Chief of Staff Aviv Kochavi warns that it's unclear if this incident is at its peak or end, or even just the beginning. What we do know is that both Blue and White Party Chairman Benny Gantz and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu are threatening severe and immediate reprisals should the terrorism continue.
אתמול תקפנו בכמה זירות, תקפנו בסוריה, תקפנו בעזה, ואנחנו מוסיפים להכות עכשיו עם מטוסים, עם טנקים, עם מסוקים, ואנחנו נמשיך להכות עד שיושב השקט. אבל יש לי גם מסר לראשי ארגוני הטרור. אם לא יושב השקט, אתם הבאים בתור.
All right, now elections are less than just a week away, and there is a lot that is weighing on the Israeli voters' minds. So here to help us break down some of those issues is columnist for Newsweek and editor of HistoryCentral.com, Mark Schulman. Thank you for being with us. Now, first of all, let's start with the security situation in the south. What do you make of Israel's response to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket barrage over the last 48 hours?
It's pretty much cut and paste. It's what we've done each other time. We're afraid to do too much. Certainly before the elections, Netanyahu did not want to get into a full-scale war. He generally tries to avoid full-scale war because one thing he does know is you know how war starts, you never know how it ends. Again, people would question what is his motives. And certainly no one wants to go to war right before an election. The Islamic Jihad knew that as well. And so they knew they could get away with this because they knew that Israel's not going to do anything that would bring us to the brink of war 1 week before the election.
So they did this, I mean, knowing full well that Netanyahu, from the position of prime minister, is really damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. Because if he invades, he looks, like he's doing it for political reasons, and if he does nothing, he looks weak.
Right, absolutely. He had no choice but to act in this particular way this time. I mean, again, the question is what could he have done the previous times, and the reality is that's not going to affect him politically very much, as we've seen time and time again.
All right, now it's been alleged that a lot of these attacks do have some sort of conspiratorial political effort behind them, or ideology, and that is that the Palestinians in Gaza are attempting to undermine Netanyahu, maybe for the sake of Gantz or for some other politician to win.
No, that's so unlikely. I mean, the reality is the two things at work here. Remember, the Islamic Jihad is controlled by the Iranians. The Iranians do not want any sort of agreement between Israel and Hamas because they want the southern border to be a second front as far as they're concerned. So they want to do anything to undermine that agreement. At this particular moment, the Hamas was okay with this because Hamas has heard that the Qataris might stop sending them money. So if the Qataris have stopped sending them money, Hamas was saying, this is what's going to happen if the Qataris stop sending us money. If you stop paying protection money to us, we're going to make sure the border is a little bit hot, shall we say. So I don't think there was anything to do with Israeli internal politics. It all had to do with politics between Israel and Iran and politics internally on the Gaza Strip.
All right, now Gantz is saying that if he were prime minister, he would react much more harshly than Netanyahu. And we just discussed a minute ago saying that, this is a very tough position for any prime minister, let alone Netanyahu, to be in. Do you believe Gantz said his word?
I think so. I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that the Likud, and we've heard it on your show before, has had a policy which is they do not want to undermine the rule of Hamas in Gaza, whether it's because they're afraid of something worse happening or because they're afraid the Palestinian Authority might come back to power. They do not want to undermine the Hamas. I think Gantz is willing to take that risk, and I think in that case he might be a little bit stronger in terms of the actions he'll take. Again, it's easier to say from the outside than it is from the inside, and you never know until you actually test somebody in the actual job.
A 10-year cessation of hostilities appears to have taken hold between Israel and the Iranian proxy, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, after 2 days in which approximately 100 rockets and mortar shells were fired indiscriminately toward Israel's southern communities, while the Israeli military conducted wide-scale bombardments of militant installations in both the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip and in Syria. At the height of hostilities yesterday evening, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a security assessment with Israel's top defense officials, after which he leveled a threat to the jihadist groups in the coastal Palestinian enclave. If calm is not restored, Israel will resort once again to targeted assassinations of the leaders of the terrorist organizations.
אתמול תקפנו בכמה זירות, תקפנו בסוריה, תקפנו בעזה, ואנחנו מוסיפים להכות עכשיו עם מטוסים, עם טנקים, עם מסוקים, ואנחנו נמשיך להכות עד שיושב השקט. אבל יש לי גם מסר לראשי ארגוני הטרור. אם לא יושב השקט, אתם הבאים בתור.
Shortly thereafter, at around 11 p.m., following extensive negotiations behind the scenes by means of Egyptian and UN mediation, an Islamic Jihad spokesperson announced that a ceasefire had taken effect. While Israeli officials did not immediately confirm the matter, the IDF spokesperson's unit announced a gradual return to routine for Israel's southern communities. Nevertheless, despite the tense quiet, the IDF Homefront Command instructed schools to remain closed throughout the day, forcing some 65,000 students to remain at home. During the course of this last round of hostilities, the Israeli military's Iron Dome anti-rocket batteries managed to intercept some 90% of the incoming projectiles. Sadly, several rockets managed to penetrate the Israeli aerial defense system, consequently striking populated areas. As a result, one man was moderately injured and another 15 people sustained light injuries. Speaking from a children's playground where a rocket struck yesterday, a local resident asserted that the efforts by the jihadists to destroy the Jewish state will not break Israel's spirit of fortitude. In spite of the 10-year ceasefire, which seemingly holds, IDF spokesperson Jonathan Conricus reiterated the military's preparedness and commitment to defend the state of Israel and its citizens.
And I can say that the IDF is ready, prepared, and committed to continue to defend Israel and Israeli sovereignty if the Islamic Jihad or any other terrorist organization doesn't stop attacking Israel.
Turning now to the United Nations headquarters in New York, where the UN Security Council unanimously passed a resolution endorsing a two-state solution for the decades-old Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The resolution, which was also supported by the United States, does not mention President Donald Trump's peace initiative, commonly known as the so-called Deal of the Century. Nevertheless, the resolution does not relate to the Palestinian demand for an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, nor does it grant the Palestinians their demand for all of the West Bank, which includes the Jordan Valley and the biblical districts of Judea and Samaria.
Council members reiterated their support for a negotiated two-state solution, recalling previous relevant UN resolutions and in accordance with international law, where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders.
During the Security Council session, UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, Nikolai Mladenov, reported on the situation in the region and called for an immediate end to the rocket fire and mortar shells at Israel.
Mr. President, I take this opportunity to call for an immediate stop to the firing of rockets and mortars that only risk dragging Gaza into another round of hostilities with no end in sight. The indiscriminate launching of rockets against civilian population centers violates international law and must end.
Mladenov further provided the Security Council with a clear overview of the latest hostilities.
Overall, during the reporting period, over 110 projectiles have been fired from Gaza towards Israeli communities, injuring 4 people, including a woman and a child. More than 100 incendiary balloons were released towards Israel, many carrying explosive devices. In response, the IDF has fired 102 missiles against Hamas and PIJ targets in Gaza, injuring 7 Palestinians, including 2 children.
In light of the report, member states expressed their concern over the latest escalation between Israel and the jihadist organizations in the Gaza Strip and urged both Israel and the Palestinians to finally return to the negotiating table for the purpose of finding a viable solution to their conflict.